Let's start with a rather interesting event. There was a meeting between Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi and off-rec journalists, a conversation. And one of the main statements from Syrskyi was that back in the fall, there were no Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk. But since mid-November, we managed to regain almost half of the city, and subsequently, the number of our troops increased. The number of troops in the city will continue to increase, and that Mirnohrad is not encircled. There are logistical difficulties there, but logistics are still functioning. So, in fact, what does this mean in terms of, first of all, information manipulation? We've seen for several months now claims that Pokrovsk has been captured, Mirnohrad has been captured, but now it turns out the situation is changing. Is something really changing on the battlefield? Have we managed to, neutralize the Russian offensive that they've been carrying out all autumn?
The fact is, the enemy has been conducting offensive operations in the Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad area since August 2024. That is, for a year and a half already. Roughly speaking, the enemy has been advancing since August 2024, and one way or another, there are always statements somewhere that Pokrovsk is about to fall, that it will be taken. Honestly, I'm already tired of refuting this because it's simply not true. Not then, not now. But I can say that overall, the enemy really did become more active somewhere in the second half of October. At that time, the enemy really did start fighting in the city. The situation was quite threatening. It was really difficult for us because additional forces had been brought in and reserves were brought in from other directions. That is, the enemy reduced the intensity of fighting in the Sumy region as Ukrainian forces were pushing them out from there. And from the Kursk region as well, troops arrived, separate groups that began offensive actions, more intense than in the area of Pokrovsk. As a result, the enemy achieved certain tactical successes. They advanced, tried to gain a foothold in the city, cut off our logistics and encircle us from the flanks, to straighten the front line and finally drive out the Ukrainian group. But there were several waves of such assaults, offensives by Russian forces, but they were not successful or only achieved some partial success. That is, indeed, the enemy entered, the enemy is present in Pokrovsk, but they were not able to capture it completely. They also failed to encircle the Ukrainian group. But now, in fact, we see that the enemy is being tied down by fighting in Pokrovsk, and there is no longer such rapid advance there as there might have been before. But of course, Russian forces will continue to carry out offensive actions. Their grouping remains numerous, considering the operational zone where they are conducting combat operations. And it is clear that there may be difficulties, and there remains a possibility that the enemy could achieve some tactical success, although the defense forces are blocking this. But any such campaign is offensive in nature. Russian, it is also accompanied by information special operations by the enemy. Putin himself has repeatedly claimed that Pokrovsk has been captured, as well as Kupiansk, but this does not correspond to reality. And we see the real situation as stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Active combat operations are ongoing. Our goal now is to hold back the enemy, to inflict maximum losses and prevent them from gaining momentum in their offensive actions. Because right now the enemy has shown that they can conduct offensive operations and achieve certain tactical successes on two fronts at once. This includes Pokrovsk as well as the direction toward Huliaipol, where the situation has been relatively stabilized. However, this advance is determined by tactical actions, but in order to prevent the enemy from developing operational success, increasing the pace of their advance and penetrating deeper into the Dnipropetrovsk region, because it's important to understand that the goal of Russian forces in this direction is further advancement toward Dnipropetrovsk. They need this for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, for propaganda purposes, and secondly, to force us into combat there, to tie us down, and then to capture the entire Donetsk region. This is well understood. That's why these attempts are being blocked, no matter how difficult it is. We also face certain challenges, especially where the enemy has the upper hand. Sometimes we have to withdraw to other positions, but let's say the enemy is not able to develop a rapid offensive pace. Right now,
Mr. Oleksandr, another statement from the Commander-in-Chief, Russians, and you've already mentioned this as well, the Russians have amassed around Pokrovsk 155,000 troops, and 40 to 50% of their armored vehicles are concentrated there. I want to understand how we even managed to hold on under such conditions and not only hold the enemy back, but also repel their advances.
Because this number of Russian troops was involved across the entire territory of Ukraine in February 2022, and now the same number is concentrated around just Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad.
Of course, there are difficulties because we have to understand that the enemy is changing tactics from time to time. Now they are creating a large number of groups. In fact, they are already splitting up. This is no longer just at the level of some decisions, let's say tactical ones. This is already at the level of command decisions. Relevant directives are being issued, and orders are given to operate in the smallest possible groups, to disperse these groups, to create many such groups in several, let's say, areas, so that they become more noticeable. You can see that sometimes this tactic brought success to the enemy, especially under unfavorable weather conditions, when we can't see everything with the help of drones. As for the needs we have today, let's say, to improve our defensive actions, it's still, of course, a greater number of drones, reconnaissance ones, that would give us the capability. Because why? The enemy is increasing the number of groups, and we need to be able to see all of this. You can imagine how many UAVs are needed to monitor these areas. Secondly, of course, are the drones themselves, like FPV drones, Mavics, which work with payload drops or directly target enemy infantry. And likewise, the munitions for them as well. Artillery, it still plays a very important role no matter what anyone thinks. Yes, drones are important, but when the artillery is firing, the enemy is especially afraid of it. And that's why the number of shells still matters. We need more of them. The same goes for aerial munitions. We do too, yes. The enemy has an advantage in the air in terms of the number of aircraft and bombs, but our air force is also operating and striking the enemy. But we need more means of destruction to stop the enemy. As for how we manage to hold on, it's a whole set of measures. First of all, as you can see, we are constantly maneuvering. We are also trying to outsmart and outplay the enemy by forcing them into areas that we consider more favorable for us. The enemy, on the other hand, is fighting to draw in reserves. To disrupt their logistics, we are doing everything we can to burn out their immediate rear areas. The enemy is also taking action. But I can also point out that the idea and concept of creating assault troops, assault regiments, and special units has largely proven itself effective. Because what we got, I don't want to say. Not exactly fire brigades, but rapid response groups that can arrive very quickly and carry out tasks preventing the enemy from breaking through at certain sections of the front. And this tactic has shown us that creating a reserve and continuing to reinforce it so that not all of it is engaged at once in combat operations, but would be preparing and, let's say, ready to move out to certain defensive lines. Then, when there is an urgent need at that line, this is still reasonable, and work on this is also ongoing.
You mentioned that Russia is accompanying its campaign in Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad with a large number of information attacks. And we felt this throughout the autumn months in our information space because there were many posts about the need to withdraw troops from Myrnohrad, Pokrovsk. Everyone there is surrounded. The commander-in-chief is out of touch with reality, and they are basically on the brink. Losses of combat-capable units. Thank you. And now, at the beginning of December, we have a completely opposite real picture on the ground. What is the purpose of these information campaigns? Is it pressure on society? Is it pressure on the armed forces command? Is it pressure on the president to change the military leadership? What goal are both the Russians and those who spread these narratives in the Ukrainian rear pursuing? What is their objective?
Russia's goal is obvious. There are several recipients, beneficiaries of these stories. Of course, first and foremost, they need to maintain their own morale and tell everyone that the so-called special military operation goals are allegedly being achieved and will be achieved. This is what Putin is now declaring more and more often. Secondly, of course, this is pressure on Ukrainian society aimed at demoralizing both the military and society as a whole. All of this is further reinforced and accompanied by terrorist Russian strikes on critical infrastructure, on facilities that ensure a normal existence for people in general. And this is also an element of intimidation, fear, and demoralization. There is another intended recipient of this. In Russia's view, it's the West. That is, Putin is trying to create an image for the West that everything is going well for him at the front, that Russian troops are advancing. And one way or another, they might be able to capture the Donetsk region. He is creating this kind of image. And that's why he puts pressure saying, well, let it be. Ukraine should make compromises, let them withdraw their troops, our troops, from Donetsk region, because supposedly Russia will achieve this anyway. And this is constant escalation of the situation. You can see that if you just track the statements from November and the beginning of December, there have been so many statements. Like now they're saying that Russia supposedly has successes at the front and not just in Donetsk region. There's Kupiansk, the Zaporizhzhia direction. They've added those, which they didn't mention before. And now it's like every week they have some kind of victory there. If it's not Pokrovsk, then it's Lyman or Siversk or Kupiansk or Huliaipol and many other places. And Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian General Staff, is constantly reporting to Putin. Why is that? Because they're creating an image of escalating the situation, including for the sake of negotiations. That Russia is having successes, that Russia supposedly has the advantage. And these are also elements of pressure. They are conducting such information campaigns. Unfortunately, it has to be said that sometimes they are even successful because they find some, let's say, echoes in the West and maybe even here in Ukraine. I don't know whether that's intentional or not. It's not for me to decide. That's what law enforcement agencies are for. But, well, it must be said that there is a powerful information campaign and elements of psychological warfare. This is being used by the Kremlin. And of course, they are counting on exactly this, that it will have a cumulative effect, creating such pressure that it will seem as if really everything is going badly for us, that we are basically retreating and so on, that everything is being destroyed by strikes. And there is no other way out except to accept all of the Kremlin's conditions. This is the enemy's campaign, absolutely clear, which they are deploying.
Another element of this campaign, I can't call it anything else. The main news this morning, President Trump has stated that it is necessary to hold elections in Ukraine. And President Zelensky's response was that we are ready, but please provide us with safe conditions. The MPs will prepare the legislative framework, and you, Americans, please make sure that everything here is safe for us. I'm just curious, how is this even possible under the conditions of real frontline mobilization? For example, how will soldiers in the trenches vote?
How
do people at the front feel about this?
Well, I can say this. As for the elections, we have demonstrated our readiness. The president of Ukraine made it clear. No one really understands, and that's what I didn't particularly like. It's not that I didn't like it, but rather that I received it with concern, with caution, in the statement of the American president during that interview. Apart from the elections, he also mentioned that things here are no longer quite democratic. And that's not true. We don't have any kind of power usurpation here. The president of Ukraine speaks about this clearly and openly. Yes, we are ready to hold elections, but there are conditions. And they are objective, they are understandable. First and foremost, it's about security. And here, what are we proposing? We say, yes, let's provide us with security guarantees, which, by the way, can arise from the electoral process. Let's say, as a starting point for further ensuring these same security guarantees that we need in order to prevent future Russian attacks and aggression. And then we can talk about the electoral process. And security guarantees involve strengthening air defense, effectively closing our skies, possibly even the physical presence of Western troops on Ukrainian territory, and a ceasefire. There's no other way. Provided that we see a ceasefire, that there are security guarantees, that we can actually carry out certain procedures that we couldn't do before, namely elections, I think that in the future, as long as it complies with current legislation, this process can be organized. But again, only if the appropriate conditions are met. Otherwise, you can't just say, let's go tomorrow or in a month to the polling station. Under today's circumstances, that's unrealistic. It's simply impossible for security reasons, among many others, ensuring the right to vote for everyone. And as soon as the appropriate conditions are created for this, first and foremost security conditions with a ceasefire, then it can be discussed. And also it's a kind of trap. Here, the president of Ukraine was absolutely right in what he said. Why? Because this is a test for the Kremlin. Well, if we're talking about elections, it's about security, it's about a ceasefire. And that's also a test. Is Putin ready to go for that? A ceasefire? Right now, he's not ready yet.
We have just a minute left. Another statement from President Zelensky that Ukraine is ready for an energy truce. And what is needed for that? We are ready. The Russians are ready, considering that we, maybe not on equal terms, but for significant strikes on their energy sector. We have already achieved this thanks to the actions of the Security Service of Ukraine, the drone forces, the main intelligence directorate, and all the defense forces.
I think that it is precisely our strikes on the enemy's oil and gas infrastructure and on their transport infrastructure, which have been added literally over the past few weeks, that are the most effective. This is the argument and incentive for why Russia may now be ready for this and faster than before. Because we have the prospect and the capability to scale up our strikes, this is also an argument for us as to why Russia should agree to an energy truce. Right now, let's say we have more trump cards for this and our position is stronger than it was a year or two ago. That is why Ukraine is open to this, and there is a statement to that effect. The Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the President, has made his statement. Now the ball is in Russia's court. I think that from the perspective of our security, including our energy security, at this moment it would be beneficial for us if the energy truce were to actually take effect.
Mr. Oleksandr, thank you very much for this morning's analysis. Oleksandr Musienko, serviceman of the Territorial Defense Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and military expert. Next up, Sviatoslav Hrinchuk and TSN.
We'll be back with you in 15 minutes.